Welcome to Demming Chronicles, where we chat with persons whose ideas and opinions can make a difference to our country. They have taken the time to think through issues that impact our country, and we have brought them on to share their views with you. On today's program, we welcome Kevin Ramnarine.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us. And our second guest, Rahanna Juman.
Hi, good afternoon again. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to both of you, Demming Chronicles. We'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back, Demming Chronicles, and we welcome again Kevin Ramnarine. Kevin, think about Trinidad and Tobago 5 years into the future. What single change would you like to see that we've achieved?
Well, in answering that question, it's difficult to point to one thing you would like to see change. But so I have three, and from those three, I will speak to one. The first one, I think, is that we need to have a reform of our constitution with the view of deconcentrating power in the hands of the executive. That's the first thing. The second thing I would like to see happen in 5 years is that we have a different approach and a different level of consideration for our natural environment. I think that we've gone down the wrong road in Trinidad with how we treat the natural environment. And how we relate to the natural environment speaks a lot about who we are. Then the third thing, which I will elaborate on, is what sort of economy we would like to see in 5 years. And I think that our hydrocarbon-based economy, our natural gas and oil-based economy, has taken us so far, and it will be difficult to take us into the future with that model. So that model has to change, and we need to have a much more diversified economy in 5 years, and we have to make it easier for the private sector to do business, and we have to have less state involvement and less state ownership in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. That's the road I want to walk down from those 3 points.
Yes, but that's about 5 things you want to see, but they're all absolutely brilliant ideas. They're ideas that will make a difference. So let's speak a little bit more about your area of specialty, which is the issue of fuels and so on, and that part of the economy. What's the changes you want to see there?
Well, we've, as you know, we have to change because the world is changing, and the world is shifting away from hydrocarbons. So the product that we export, the demand for that internationally is going to be in decline. In addition to which, a lot of pressure is being put onto the global economy now by the European Union and eventually by the United States and other members of the OECD to increase the pressure on countries that produce ammonia and LNG using a lot of carbon. So, for example, in the not too distant future, European countries that wish to import ammonia and LNG into their borders from countries like Trinidad will face tariffs on those imports, which means that the products that we produce will become more expensive internationally because they are produced using so much carbon dioxide related emissions. So we have to be wary of those changes taking place globally and adapt to them. And our what I call the modern economy of Trinidad and Tobago, this is my personal opinion, really started in 1974 with what we collectively referred to as the first oil boom, and has taken us all the way down now to 2021. And obviously, given the performance of the economy in the last 5 years, that model has run its course. And yes, we will continue to have oil and gas production into the future. And yes, we will continue to earn revenue from oil, gas, ammonia, and methanol, but it will not be at the levels that we enjoyed, let's say in 2013, 2014, 2015, so that the ability of that sector to pull our economy forward into the future is diminished. And I was making the point to a friend on Facebook that in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when we had that recessionary period, natural gas was there as the vehicle to pull us out. And we went into the world of LNG and so on. The question is, what is going to pull us out of this current, period of decline? We've lost 30 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars in terms of real GDP in the last 5 or 6 years. Our real GDP numbers have come down from around 170 billion in 2015 to about 140 billion now. It could be worse because of, we haven't really quantified the impact of COVID on the economy. So what's going to take us back to 170? And then what is going to take us beyond 170? And the answer cannot be solely oil, gas, ammonia, and methanol. So we have to find a way to, in my respectful view, triple or quadruple our non-energy exports. Because ultimately, we have to earn US dollars from a source other than oil and natural gas, ammonia and methanol, which will always be part of the story, but it can't be the dominant economic narrative of Trinidad and Tobago into the future. So in 2026, if I were to travel into the future and arrive in 2026, I would like to see some other sector being a dominant part of that economic narrative of Trinidad and Tobago. And the question is, what is that sector? Or is it that we have multiple options available to us? And one of the sectors that we have, which I think is fairly strong in Trinidad, is our manufacturing sector. It has not lived up to its true potential for different reasons, one of which is the availability of labor. We have now an influx of Venezuelan migrants, refugees into Trinidad and Tobago, and maybe that is one way forward for us, because our labor force participation rate is in decline. We have an aging population in Trinidad and Tobago. So maybe the Venezuelan exodus into Trinidad may have a silver lining for our economy. I mean, migration is a part of the economic story of many great economies of the world: Singapore, Qatar, the United States, England, and so on. A lot of what propels those economies are people who have migrated to those countries. The other thing I see, if I was to walk 5 years into the future, is our maritime sector. I don't know how many people realize, but our most valuable asset is not oil and gas. It's the Gulf of Paria. And the Gulf of Paria is one of the calmest pieces of water in this part of the world, in the Western Hemisphere. And it is also home to man-made and natural deepwater harbors, where we could have ships coming in depths of water greater than 12 meters. That is an advantage that our country has that other countries like Guyana and Suriname don't have, because they have shallower drafts and so on. So we need to find a way to utilize that natural advantage of the Gulf of Paria, calm water, deep water, able to accommodate deep water vessels. We also have the skill sets here, Denise. One of the things that I'm very happy with is the establishment of the Maritime Academy at UTT. Now, I don't know exactly how it's functioning at this point in time, but it is a good idea. And in addition to that, Trinidad has had a long history in the maritime sector. So the assets that we have in Chaguaramas, the assets that we have in Galeota, I'm speaking here to the ports in Chaguaramas, Port of Spain, Point Lisas, the ports in Point Apia, Point Fortin, and then Galeota. We have to find a way to make this maritime, or they call it blue economy, a big part of that narrative, because the maritime sector is a billion dollar opportunity, multi-billion dollar. But apart from that, while energy which generates 40 to 45% of our GDP. That might sound like a lot. That only represents 3.7% of our labor force. Yeah. So energy is, a great contributor to GDP and revenue, but small generator of jobs. I think that the maritime sector and the manufacturing sector could be where we could contribute greatly to GDP while generating thousands of well-paying jobs. So that's where I see us in 5 years. But that journey has to start now, right? And I'm not seeing that coming together at this point in time. Part of making that a reality is this whole ease of doing business issue, which I know you want to discuss.
Well, you have raised so many things that I want to discuss. But let's just talk a little bit about the maritime sector, because there was a time when Trinidad was the preferred port for people in the leisure sector, people who own yachts and so on. And just by observation, if you go down to the Chaguaramas area, you will see that has depleted. It's no longer as populated as it used to be. What could be a quick win or a quick fix or an immediate something that could be done that could stimulate that maritime sector once again?
Well, certainly in this COVID environment, it is difficult, and this is why vaccination is critical, and getting the country vaccinated and back to work is important. I mean, if you look at Bloomberg channel all day and you listen to what they've been saying, it is clear that all the great minds in the United States are of the opinion that they have to vaccinate their country to get back to normalcy. So before the conversation could begin about resuscitating Chaguaramas and the yachting sector, the vaccination and the herd immunity of Trinidad and Tobago is important. I think that one of the things that we have to do is we have to look at the infrastructure in Chaguaramas. The one road in, one road out, that the access to Chaguaramas is limited. And so we have to look at that road. When we were in government, there was talk about dualing that road. That comes with a lot of challenges. As you know, there are people living on both sides of the road. There was also talk about a causeway in the sea that would run from somewhere around sea lots all the way down to Chaguaramas, which is not an inconceivable thing in this world that we live in. These things are possible. But one of the things would be the access into the northwestern peninsula, Chaguaramas Peninsula area. The other thing I would think would be the incentives that we offer the yachting sector and so on. Those would be some of the fiscal incentives that we offer that sector. But that sector is a big generator of jobs, creator of jobs, it stimulates that whole part of the economy up there. So getting that going is very important. There's also room up there for ship repair, shipbuilding, and so on. And then, of course, there are the other assets we spoke about in what we call the escort dock. So when we closed down Metal, the country may not know, but Metal had excellent port facilities. And those port facilities, what they call the escort dock, could accommodate large ships, could accommodate supply vessels and so on that work on offshore rigs. We could monetize that. And then there is further down south again, there are the facilities in what used to be Petrotrin. Trinidad should be the bunkering hub of the hemisphere. People may not know, but Singapore is the bunkering hub of Asia. Yeah. And they don't have a drop of oil. They don't produce a drop of oil, but what they do is they trade fuel. So bunkering could become a major industry for Trinidad. To our south, we have Guyana and Suriname, who are emerging as giants in oil and gas. And that is going to come with a lot of traffic flow down there of ships and so on. So this is why I think the maritime sector is an important area for Trinidad. And of course, I mentioned the manufacturing sector, right? Which one of the constant things you hear from people in manufacturing is that they don't have sufficient labor to run three shifts per day or to run 24-hour shifts. And then, of course, there are other issues with the efficiency of our ports and so on, and the efficiency of our customs and excise and all that. So ease of doing business, if we have to get this country where we want it to be, and I've been saying this for the last 5 years. I was fortunate to be in contact with the Jamaican government when I was a minister. And I was always impressed with the direction that Jamaica was headed in way back 10 years ago. And Jamaica is now the highest ranked country in the Caribbean, in the CARICOM, in terms of ease of doing business. I think they're ranked somewhere in the 60s.
Yes.
We are
still at 105.
We are 105.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have to get up into those 60s. And as a result of Jamaica being so highly ranked, Jamaica has been attracting all sorts of investments,
including people who don't want. So, for example, I'm referencing We Pay. But Kevin, as we bring this interview to a close, what should the man in the street be looking out for to feel that the country is going in the right direction?
There are many things you should look out for. One of which obviously would be the murder rate coming down, right? Because we can't claim to be living in a great country if we have crime out of control, or if we have crime where we don't want it to be. But I would say one of the things that we will be I would look for, is that we have a highly educated group of young people in Trinidad. I have been a lecturer at the Lockjack School of Business for a while now, and I have seen the frustration of the students. Some of them have multiple master's degrees and very bright, young, talented people, and they are becoming frustrated and they are looking to migrate. So what I would look for is the creation of not just jobs, because we want jobs which are fulfilling, jobs which are commensurate with the qualifications of the people that we've trained for the last 15, 20 years, and jobs which are well-paying, and jobs which are stable, right? Because we have, and I don't have the exact figure, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. We have tens of thousands of young people who are highly qualified, who are really just being wasted. Yeah. And if we don't do something about it, those young people are going to leave, and they're going to go to Canada, and they're going to go to the UK and so on. So I would look for job creation. And the way to get jobs created is to get the private sector investing in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll end by saying that I think the state is too dominant in the economy. And I think that dominance has not gone in any direction but up. And I think that the state has to recede a bit now from the economy and allow the private sector to move into that space that the state has receded from, which is exactly what the Jamaicans did.
Yeah.
So that's how I'll end the interview.
And thank you very much, Kevin Ramnarine. And thank you for being part of Demming Chronicles. An excellent note on which to end, that we need to focus on creating jobs for young people so that we do not have a continuation of the brain drain. Demming Chronicles. We'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back, Demming Chronicles, and welcome Rahanna Juman. Rahanna, why are mangroves important in this country?
Well, first of all, mangroves are a specially adapted group of plants, both trees and shrubs, that are adapted to live in the harsh intertidal zone, where they basically buffer wave energy, and they help to protect our coastlines. So they provide many what we call ecosystem services because of where they're located. They're sometimes referred to as the supermarket of the sea, because they provide so much organic material that feeds our ocean, feeds our fishes, and so on. They provide habitats for a number of species, and including commercially important species that we depend on for livelihood, or oysters or crabs, fish, and everything comes from our mangroves. But most importantly, and what we are beginning to learn more and more now, mangroves play a very important role when it comes to climate change mitigation, in the sense that it sequesters or it captures more carbon dioxide than terrestrial plants. So preliminary work that has been done by the Institute has estimated that our mangrove forest actually captures more than 4 times more carbon dioxide than our terrestrial forests. So it's important for climate mitigation as well as climate change adaptation, because again, of where it's located, because of its structure, it helps to dissipate wave energy, protect our coastline. It acts as a windbreak. It helps protect us against things like coastal flooding. And with climate change, we expect increase in sea level rise, storm surges, and so on. And it provides that layer of protection for us. So it's very important.
That's a brilliant kind of explanation of what mangroves do. But tell me, what can we do to revive our mangroves?
Well, first of all, before you could, there's a lot of emphasis on mangrove restoration and mangrove rehabilitation because we've begun to understand how important they are. But before we can do that, we have to look at removing the impacts on our ecosystems and our mangrove forests. So in the past, most of our mangrove, at least 50% of our mangrove, were cleared to build, industries, for housing estates, for the expansion in the city of Port of Spain, and so forth. It has been reclaimed for other purposes. And then we have problems with things like land-based sources of pollution, where we have polluted waters entering our mangrove system. We have litter. Trinidadians have a way we like to get rid of our litter, but we don't know where they end up. Many times they end up in our mangroves. So we have to remove these stressors. Another thing that is people don't think very much about is what we term hydrological alterations. So to mitigate, for instance, against a flood, you may go in and you may widen a river, right? Or you may deepen a river. And then you take the spoil, the material that you dredge, and you place it on the bank of the mangrove forest. And that impacts on the mangrove forest because the water that would normally enter the forest tidally is no longer allowed to enter the forest. And then you have situations where you have built up of saline conditions and hypersaline condition, very high salinities that can lead to mangrove die-off. Also, too, we're taking out a lot of water, fresh water, that would normally enter our mangrove forests because we're keeping it for our use. So reducing how much actually enters. So, we alter the hydrology of the system, and that has a major impact. So we have to remove those impacts. We have to be more conscious of our development where we build. We have to be wary that as sea level rises, our mangroves are going to start to migrate landwards. And we're already seeing it. For instance, in Caroni Swamp, because of sea level rise and because the amount of fresh water that would normally enter the swamp has reduced substantially, we're seeing where mangroves are migrating inland. However, they're overtaking other wetland type communities such as freshwater marsh and so forth. And that has its own problems in terms of biodiversity and so on. But if we continue to build very close to a mangrove, build our roads, build our houses, right, there's no space for mangroves to migrate landward. And then you can end up with a situation known as coastal squeeze, where we literally squeeze out the mangrove from along our coast. So we have to be very conscious where we build, how close we build to a mangrove forest, what we put into a mangrove forest in terms of the water that goes in, whether it's polluted or not. And, just how we interface and how we react to our mangrove forest. And even in terms of people that exploit the forest, people who hunt and so forth, we have issues with over-harvesting of crabs, over-harvesting of oysters, destructive harvesting methods. All these things have to be, we have to address.
Rahanna, you've raised a range of issues. But tell me, what can the citizen do to just make a positive difference?
Well, one of the things I would say is that the first thing we need to do is to appreciate our mangrove forest and how important it is to us. I tell people, like, if you go to South America, you have to travel for days to come across mangrove. In Trinidad, it takes you for about 15 minutes from Port of Spain. And when you're in the middle of the Caroni Swamp, you're in the wilderness, with all this mangroves and all these birds and everything. So we need to appreciate what we have, what is ours, and we need to therefore protect it. So as citizens, again, we need to be conscious of our behavior. When we go in, make sure we don't leave anything behind in terms of our litter. even if we go into exploit, if you're a fisher, if you're a crab catcher, do it in a way that does not create chaos. And well, I wouldn't say create chaos, but where it's sustainable, right? That it's not too destructive. Destructive harvesting methods, for instance, like cutting the roots of trees to harvest oyster. When you cut the roots, you remove all the young oysters as well, not only the adults. Also, we need to know where our wastewater is going from our drains, our spray water, our sewage. We need to know where our litter, where our solid waste is going. We traditionally, people have this way that they think if they throw it into the river, it just disappears. However, it ends up in our mangrove forest. It ends up on our beach, and then we have to interact with it when we go to the beach. So be very conscious of because what we do in our backyards, what we do at home can have an impact, because everything on land is connected to the coast and connected to the sea. So be very conscious and learn and spread information and become an active participant in efforts to rehabilitate mangrove systems.
If you could impact policy, what area of policy would you like to see created or strengthened so that it has a positive impact on our mangroves?
Well, we do have policies in terms of, we have a national wetlands policy that was developed back in 2001, and that policy speaks to all wetland areas. And we do have legislation under our Forestry Act that protects areas such as wildlife sanctuaries and forest reserves and so forth. But mangrove as a species is not protected. There's always the option of having it declared an environmentally sensitive species under the EM Act. But I think more importantly, it's one thing is having the policies and the legislation. The other thing we fall short on is enforcement. That has always been an issue, implementation of policies, enforcement of laws. And in order for us to mitigate against that, because you would always hear the situation where we don't have resources to do it, right? One of the ways is to educate our citizens, make sure that they understand how important this resource is for us, especially now in these times when you're dealing with impacts due to climate change, and become an active participant in its conservation, its protection, and its rehabilitation.
Earlier on, you talked about carbon sequestration by using mangroves. Can you just explain that in simpler words so that our viewers can see what you're talking
No
about?
problem. So one of the biggest concerns with regards to climate change is the amount of carbon dioxide that's being emitted into the atmosphere. And a lot of this comes from the burning of fossil fuel and a lot of industrial activities and so forth. Now, our ocean absorbs a lot of carbon dioxide, but also too, plants, in terms of its natural processes, its photosynthesis, will take in carbon dioxide, right, as a raw material and create carbohydrates or food, right? They're primary producers. But mangroves, they have the capacity to absorb a lot more carbon dioxide than terrestrial forests. They're referred to now as the blue carbon, and it's important because to mitigate against carbon impact, we have to remove a lot of that carbon dioxide from our atmosphere, and our mangroves actually help us do that, remove that carbon dioxide from our atmosphere.
So here's my logic, which might be totally off. As a high carbon emitter, is it then in our interest to expand our mangroves and maybe eventually, minimize the negative carbons that we are emitting based on our fossil fuel sector and our hydrocarbon sector?
Yes, that's actually what we would promote, because you can actually, the restoration, the rehabilitation of mangrove forests can be used as a mechanism to offset carbon dioxide emissions, the emissions that we produce from our industrial activities. So we can use it to offset, and even in terms of, you have these new carbon markets being created where you can trade. So it can be used for that purpose as well. But definitely it's something that industry should consider in terms of helping to offset their carbon dioxide emission by rehabilitating these ecosystems.
As we bring this interview to a close, Rahanna, what is your advice to the man in the street? What's your advice to our country? Because we have to preserve this country. What's your advice?
Well, first of all, I think people have to realize how vulnerable Trinidad and Tobago, as a small island developing state, we are to the impacts of climate change. Climate change is not something that is forecast in the future. We are already experiencing it. I mean, you look at what's going on all around the world with the forest fires and the floods and so forth, and we have to realize that our mangrove is our natural defense, and therefore we need to protect it. We need to conserve it. We need to rehabilitate degraded ecosystems. We need to protect our mangroves so that it can continue to protect us and allow us to live on these beautiful islands.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And on that note, we bring this interview to a close. Let's protect our beautiful island and possibly an opportunity to balance our carbon emissions with planting and reviving our mangroves. Demming Chronicles, Season 2. Thank you very much for being with us. Like, follow us, comment on us. Demming Chronicles. Be safe.